My son thought I hadn't noticed him slipping something strange into my backpack, a sly smile curling on his lips, as though it were nothing more than a harmless joke. But I had seen it. I always noticed the little things with him, the twitch of his fingers, the way his eyes refused to meet mine when he was hiding something. When he turned away confident in his deception, I quietly retrieved the object and placed it back in his drawer where it belonged. 30 minutes later, the flashing red and blue lights painted our living room walls. The police arrived. You won't believe what unfolded next. Before I tell you, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. Terry's fist came down hard against the oak table, the wood shuddering under the impact. The salt shaker toppled, spilling white grains that scattered like shattered glass across the surface. My fork froze halfway to my mouth, a piece of meatloaf still pierced on the tines. The silence that followed felt louder than the crash itself. "Dad, we need another 2,000 this month," Terry said. The words hit me harder than his fist had. Slowly, I set my fork down, the quiet clink of metal against ceramic echoing in the heavy air. Across from me, Zella twisted her wedding ring around her finger. The gold caught the harsh light from above, flashing in small circles, as if mocking her nervousness. Her mascara had smudged beneath her eyes, evidence she'd been crying long before dinner even started. "Enough," I said. The word came out sharper, colder than I'd meant. "You're 28, Terry. It's time to learn to provide for your wife yourself." He pushed back from the table, towering over me, his face red with a mixture of anger and desperation. Sometimes I couldn't tell the difference with him. They both looked the same. Both wore down the people around him like waves grinding stone. "You're being selfish," he shot back, his voice cracking under the weight of his words. Mom would have understood. She would have helped. The mention of Martha was like a blow to the gut. My jaw clenched, my knuckles whitened against the table's edge. Zella broke into quiet sobs again, pressing her napkin to her face, muffling the sound but not the ache behind it. The green beans on my plate had gone cold. Their butter glaze stiffened into something unappetizing. I pushed my chair back with a screech against the linoleum, the sound slicing through the room like a blade. "I've given you $1,200 just this month," I said, rising to my feet. Before that, it was the wedding venue, the apartment deposit you never used, Zella's medical bills. Always something, always another hand held out. "Dad, please," Zella whispered, her voice trembling. "No." My voice cracked like old wood. "I won't enable this anymore." The smell of cooling meatloaf and congealed gravy clung to the air, thick with tension, choking out anything that might have resembled love. Terry's chest rose and fell rapidly, his breaths ragged. Zella kept her eyes glued to the pattern on her plate, as if it might reveal an escape from this suffocating moment. The clock above the sink ticked mercilessly towards 7:35. I walked toward the kitchen doorway, each step heavier than the last. Behind me, Zella whispered something desperate to Terry, her words too soft for me to catch, but the tone was unmistakable, pleading afraid. The stairs groaned under my weight as I climbed, carrying me away from the wreckage of another family dinner. Below, their voices rose again, Terry's anger, Zella's tears blending into the familiar painful symphony of dysfunction that had become our household soundtrack. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched dark and narrow except for the faint glow spilling from my bedroom doorway. Inside, Martha's photograph waited on the nightstand, the last trace of a time when our family still made sense. I closed the door behind me, the soft click sealing off the chaos below. Sitting heavily on the edge of the bed, the springs protested after 30 years of holding the weight of our lives together. Martha's side of the mattress remained untouched, her pillows still arranged as she'd left them 5 years ago, like she might walk in at any moment and settle down beside me. My hands trembled, not from fear but from exhaustion, the kind of bone-deep weariness that comes from fighting the same war again and again, never winning, only surviving. I picked up the photograph. Martha in her blue dress, the one she wore for our 25th anniversary cruise. Her smile glowed warm, genuine, the way she had always been able to see light, even in the darkest corners. She would have understood, Terry had said. Maybe he was right. Martha always believed the best in people, especially in our son. But she also believed in consequences. She believed in teaching, not enabling. I traced her face through the glass, my thumb pausing over the curve of her cheek. The warmth of the lamp's glow made the picture feel almost alive. 2 years ago, I had sold my vintage Harley, the one I'd cared for like a second child, just to pay for Terry and Zella's wedding deposit. I had thought then that sacrifice would be enough. But sacrifices I was learning were bottomless when love was mixed with entitlement. The bike had been my pride and joy, a 1970 Sportster I had painstakingly restored with my own two hands in the lonely months after Martha's death. Every bolt polished, every dent smoothed out, every Sunday afternoon spent hunched over the frame in the garage had been a kind of therapy, a conversation with silence. When I finally finished, I told myself I was ready to ride again, ready to carry her memory forward. But when Terry asked for money for the wedding, I convinced myself selling the bike was for love for family. I wheeled it out of the garage one final time, handed over the keys, and accepted the check. Terry barely looked at me, barely thanked me. His mind was already on honeymoon expenses, already asking if I could help out just a little more before the ink on the sale had even dried. 18 months later, it was the apartment's security deposit. $3,000, $3,000 that I had been saving for years to fund my dream fishing trip to Alaska, the one I had been planning since before retirement. Instead of crisp mountain air and the solitude of still waters, my money went to a faceless landlord for an apartment Terry and Zella never even moved into. Changed circumstances, they said. Always some excuse. Always something. 6 months ago, it was Zella's medical bills. I clocked overtime on construction sites I should have left behind a decade ago, my back screaming with every lift, my knees grinding like sandpaper. I told myself it was worth it if it saved her. But the specialists found nothing, just stress-induced migraines. Nothing more. I opened the nightstand drawer and pulled out the stack of papers that had become the quiet weight of my evenings. Loan documents, credit applications, emergency withdrawals, all bearing my signature. Every one of them inked in a moment of paternal weakness. Thin paper fragile in my hands, yet heavy with consequence. $47,000. That was the price of my son's emergency since Martha's funeral. $47,000 that should have been my safety net in old age, that should have bought me peace instead of financing his chaos. Martha's perfume bottle still sat uncapped on the dresser, nearly empty, but never discarded. Some nights I opened it, breathing in the faint trace of her, closing my eyes, imagining she had just walked into the room. But tonight the scent burned my chest sharp and accusing. I caught sight of myself in the mirror above the dresser. An old man stared back at me. Tired eyes lined face hair gone gray in streaks that Martha never lived to see. My shoulders bent not just from years of work, but from carrying burdens that weren't mine. When had I become this man? When had love turned into financial rescue, into blind sacrifice? Martha's last words whispered back to me across the years. Teach him to fly on his own ray. Don't let him live in our shadow forever. I closed the drawer firmly, the stack of loan documents disappearing like evidence of my failures as a father. Below me, voices carried faintly through the floorboards, Terry's tone lower now, pleading instead of demanding. Zella's words came in short, clipped bursts, the rhythm of someone giving instructions. I turned off the lamp. Darkness wrapped around me like an old coat. But I didn't lie down. I sat in the stillness listening. The house creaked and settled. Their whispers rose and fell below. My own breath, slow and uneven, became the only sound in the room. I told myself tomorrow would be different. It had to be. The coffee maker's gurgle broke the silence of dawn, steam rising from the glass carafe like incense curling toward heaven. I had been awake since 5:30, staring at the ceiling, replaying the night until I finally gave up on sleep. The kitchen looked different in the morning light, gentler, calmer, as if the night's bitterness had been rinsed away by the pale sun creeping through the curtains. The table was cleared, the salt shaker upright again, the floor swept clean of stray crystals. But I knew the real mess wasn't so easy to tidy. I stood at the sink, dressed in the uniform of my later years, a flannel shirt, worn jeans, boots scuffed from years of labor. The faint scent of sawdust still clung to me, a reminder of the workshop that had become my sanctuary. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked at an empty street. Mrs. Peterson's newspaper lay in her driveway, waiting for her slow shuffle in her bathrobe. Then came the footsteps, heavy on the stairs, hesitant, at exactly 7:05. Terry appeared in the kitchen doorway. His wrinkled t-shirt sagged over boxers, his hair sticking up in wild tufts, dark circles shadowing his eyes. He looked less like a man and more like a boy who'd stayed up too late afraid of the consequences that morning always brings. I tightened my grip on the coffee mug. Whatever came next, I knew it was time for something to change. He avoided my eyes, staring instead at the countertop as if the pattern in the laminate might save him from confrontation. "Coffee's fresh," I said, not turning from the sink. My voice sounded steady, practiced, almost too controlled, as though calmness itself had become my only defense. "Good. Thanks." His reply was soft, almost a mumble. The words trembled out of him, carrying no conviction. I heard him fumble with a mug. Ceramic tapped against glass hands, unsteady spilling drops of coffee that dotted the counter like ink stains. 2 minutes later, Zella shuffled into the kitchen, her bathrobe pulled tight around her thin frame, as though she could shield herself from more than just the morning chill. Her hair stuck out in uneven tufts, yesterday's makeup smudged beneath swollen eyes. She had been crying again, or perhaps she hadn't stopped at all since last night. "Good morning," she offered, her voice tentative, hopeful. Each syllable sounded like an olive branch extended across a battlefield, as if politeness could erase the damage already done. I nodded once, nothing more. Silence spread across the room, wide and unyielding. The only sounds were the coffee maker's last hiss and the distant growl of the newspaper delivery truck outside. I turned back to the sink, my hands busy with last night's dishes. Plate rinse, soap scrub. The water was nearly scalding, and I let it burn, let it sting. Pain meant clarity. Pain reminded me I was still in control of something. Behind me, Terry poured coffee with shaking hands. The splash of liquid echoed louder than it should have, droplets hitting the counter in tiny accusing notes. Zella moved toward the toaster as if determined to perform normalcy. Minutes later, the acrid smell of burning bread curled through the air. She yanked the toast free, scraping blackened crust into the sink. The crumbs fell like ash, remnants of a fire no one could contain. "I'm going out today," Terry blurted suddenly. His tone was sharp, defensive, as though preparing himself for a fight before I'd even spoken. "Job interviews." I turned from the sink, meeting his eyes at last. They darted away, searching refuge in the steam rising from his mug. "Take the house key," I said quietly. The words hung heavy, unspoken implications filling the silence. He might not be back, or maybe I wouldn't be here when he returned. Either way, something would change. Color rushed to Terry's face. His jaw clenched, but no argument came. The morning sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes that drifted lazily in the space between us. Everything felt suspended, my heartbeat pounding, steady in my ears, the silence loud enough to drown out thought. Terry grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl instead of sitting down. His sneakers squeaked against the linoleum as he paced, restless, nervous energy radiating from him like waves of heat. "Terry." My voice stopped him mid-step. He turned, a flicker of hope lighting his eyes. "Responsibility," I said simply. "It's not a dirty word." The hope vanished instantly. His jaw locked, his lips pressed thin. Without another word, he stormed out the front door, slamming hard enough to rattle the window panes. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot, final and violent. Zella stayed at the table, the burnt toast untouched on her plate. Her eyes found mine, pleading silently. Her mouth opened as if words might come to bridge the distance. But I was already moving, pouring my coffee into a travel mug, heading for the garage. The truck's engine roared to life on the first try, dependable as always. As I backed down the driveway, I glanced toward the kitchen window. Zella stood there, framed in the glass, a small figure in a bathrobe, alone, with her blackened toast and the secrets she and Terry guarded like locked doors. The morning stretched ahead, full of dread and possibility in equal measure. I didn't expect to hear Terry's voice again so soon. The front door had barely shut behind me when he came bounding from the sofa, his face alight with a strange, almost frantic excitement. "Dad, I'm sorry about yesterday." He burst out, words tumbling over each other. Tech Forge Solutions hired me. The announcement hit me like a sucker punch. My hand still clutching my lunch cooler faltered. I set it down carefully on the hardwood floor, suddenly unsure of my balance. Terry rushed forward, pulling me into an embrace that lasted too long, held too tight. "Really?" I asked, surprised by the tremor in my own voice. "That's wonderful, son." Zella clapped from her armchair, sharp, deliberate claps that rang too loud in the quiet house. She was perfectly put together now, makeup, flawless, smile painted on like a mask. But her eyes betrayed her. They didn't shine, they watched. "He got the call this afternoon," she announced with forced cheer as though hosting a game show. "Senior IT consultant position?" Terry stepped back but stayed close, running his hand through his hair, that same nervous gesture he'd had since he was a boy. His shirt was pressed crisp, freshly ironed. "When had he done laundry? I knew you had it in you." I said, my shoulders loosening for the first time in days. Relief, dangerous, seductive relief began to creep into my chest. The afternoon sun streamed through the living room window, catching the dust motes midair, softening the sharp edges of the day. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to believe. "When do you start Monday?" Terry said quickly. Too quickly. "They want me immediately." His voice was pitched higher than usual, rehearsed, careful. But in my chest, pride swelled anyway, fighting with suspicion, leaving me suspended between trust and doubt. Perhaps yesterday's harsh words had done their job. Maybe, just maybe, they had shaken something loose in Terry, pushed him toward real responsibility at last. Martha used to tell me that sometimes love wasn't enough, that tough love was the only language life respected. Maybe she'd been right, and yet something gnawed at me, a splinter I couldn't ignore. Terry kept fiddling with his shirt collar, smoothing down fabric that wasn't wrinkled. The gesture wasn't nervous pride, it was performance. His eyes flicked to Zella, quick searching, like a student looking for a teacher's nod. And every time she gave it a small smile, a subtle tilt of her head, reassurance wrapped in silence. "What's the salary like?" I asked, easing back into my recliner. The leather creaked under me, a sound that usually felt like home. "65,000 to start," Terry replied instantly. Too instantly. Plus benefits, health, dental, 401k with matching. The whole package. They were the right answers. The details were polished, plausible, exactly what a real employer would say. So why did my mind keep circling the inconsistencies like a vulture? The timing was too neat, too convenient. Yesterday, fists and anger. Today, miracle redemption wrapped in a job offer. Outside, the suburban soundtrack carried on a lawnmower, roaring to life, children's laughter floating from a backyard down the street, a dog barking at nothing in particular. Normal sounds, comforting sounds. But to me, they underlined the strangeness of this moment, the artificial glow of our little celebration. "This calls for a barbecue," I announced, suddenly forcing cheer into my voice. "Let me fire up the grill. We can celebrate properly." Terry's face lit up with what looked like genuine happiness. For the first time in months, maybe years, I thought I saw my son, as he had once been a boy, thrilled by the promise of normal family rituals. "That sounds perfect, Dad. Just like old times." Zella clapped softly, her smile rehearsed but serviceable. "I'll make my potato salad the one with the mustard dressing you like." I pushed myself up my joints, protesting after a long day on the site. "Give me 20 minutes to get the charcoal going. Terry, you can help me outside in a bit." Actually, he was already moving toward the staircase. "I need to grab something from upstairs first. Just some papers from the interview. Want to show you the offer letter." I nodded, turning toward the back door, relief loosening my chest. The grill waited on the patio, black cover draped over it like a loyal friend. Tonight, I told myself, was a new beginning, a chance to stitch up what had nearly torn apart yesterday. Behind me, I heard Terry's footsteps on the stairs, Zella clattering dishes in the kitchen. Domestic sounds. Normal sounds. "What kind of meat do you want?" I called through the screen door. "Burgers for you, chicken for Zella." The charcoal hissed as lighter fluid took hold, small orange tongues licking at the black lumps, slowly building into flame. I wiped my hands on the kitchen towel draped over the grill handle, savoring the familiar ritual, the promise of fire food and fragile peace. Terry had gone upstairs 10 minutes earlier, too long for just grabbing papers. Through the kitchen window, Zella moved around, placing bowls on the counter. From here, it looked like an ordinary evening in an ordinary house, a scene that would have comforted any passerby. And then my stomach dropped. There he was, Terry, not upstairs, not fetching papers, but crouched near the front door, hunched over my navy blue work backpack. I froze, the grilling fork heavy in my hand. His movements were quick, practiced, furtive. He glanced around the room like a thief in his own home before unzipping the bag. My bag. My heart hammered in my chest. From his pocket, he pulled something small, wrapped in what looked like dark tissue paper. With a precision that spoke of forethought, not accident, he tucked it deep inside, wedging it between my work gloves and measuring tape, as if hiding a secret among tools I trusted. For a split second, my mind scrambled for an explanation. A gift, a surprise. Something innocent. But no, the secretive glances, the careful way he buried the item, the speed with which he zipped the bag shut, it was too deliberate, too wrong. He stepped back, brushed his hands against his jeans as though wiping away evidence. The whole sequence took less than 30 seconds, but to me, it stretched into eternity, each heartbeat pounding like a drum inside my ears. Smoke from the grill curled upward, acrid choking. The suburban soundtrack, the dog barking, the laughter, the distant traffic faded into muffled background noise. The world tilted off kilter, as though reality itself had shifted in that brief half-minute. And standing in the shadows of my own patio, grilling fork clenched tight, I realized something chilling. My son wasn't celebrating. He was setting me up. I forced myself to turn back toward the grill, though my hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the grate. The charcoal glowed red hot, the flames licking upward, like eager tongues ready to sear meat into savory perfection. Yet the smell that usually awakened memories of summers past of family laughter and Martha's gentle teasing now made my stomach twist with unease. My appetite had vanished, burned away by suspicion. Whatever Terry had hidden in my bag, it wasn't just casual. It wasn't harmless. It felt deliberate, calculated, dangerous even. But to confront him right now would mean admitting that I'd been watching, spying on my own flesh and blood, like he was a stranger I didn't trust. And maybe he was. Maybe that was the truth I'd been refusing to see. The back door opened with its familiar squeak, a sound that once would have filled me with comfort. Martha coming out with lemonade, Terry bounding out as a boy with a baseball glove in hand. But tonight it carried the weight of intrusion. "Dad, how are those coals coming along?" Terry's voice was bright, too bright, carrying the forced enthusiasm of someone reading lines from a script. I swallowed hard, tasting ash in suspicion. Almost ready, I managed my voice tighter than I wanted. I didn't turn around. Just need a few more minutes. His footsteps approached across the wooden deck, each one heavy in my ears. I caught his figure in the corner of my vision, leaning against the patio railing. Casual, relaxed, too casual. A perfect performance. But I couldn't shake the image of him hunched over my backpack, movements, sharp and furtive, his hands working with precision to hide something he didn't want me to see. I forced myself to breathe evenly, to sound normal. "You know what, son," I said, finally turning to face him. The firelight flickered across his face, painting him in shifting shadows. "I think I left my work gloves in the garage. Mind grabbing them while I tend to this fire?" For a moment, just a flicker, his smile faltered. His eyes darted quick and sharp before he caught himself. Then he nodded smoothly, that rehearsed brightness snapping back into place. "Sure thing, Dad. No problem at all." I watched as he moved back inside his silhouette, framed briefly in the doorway's glow. Through the kitchen window, I saw him pass by my backpack without even looking at it, as if it meant nothing. As if he hadn't just slipped something inside moments earlier. The performance was flawless. Too flawless. A man innocent of deception doesn't need to pretend that hard. My chest tightened. Whatever was hidden in that bag, I had to find out. But timing was everything. If I moved too quickly, I'd lose any chance of understanding the truth. Just grabbing some seasoning from the kitchen, I called out to Zella, making sure my voice sounded casual, ordinary. The sound of water pipes groaning upstairs gave me my window. Terry turning on the faucet, maybe washing his face, maybe buying himself time. Either way, it gave me a few precious minutes. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stepped inside. The living room looked unchanged, yet it felt different now, alien, hostile. The shadows seemed thicker, clinging to the corners of the room. Every creak of the floorboards beneath my boots sounded amplified, a threat to betray me. I dropped to one knee beside the backpack. My fingers hesitated on the zipper, the cool metal biting against my skin. One breath in, one breath out. Then I pulled. The zipper whispered, open, metallic and soft, yet deafening in the stillness. Inside lay my life, neatly packed, the yellow measuring tape I'd trusted for decades, leather gloves darkened by years of labor, My spiral notebook filled with sketches of projects that would never be built. All of it familiar. All of it mine. Except for what wasn't. My hands searched deeper, probing carefully through the layered tools of my trade until it brushed something alien. Smooth. Wrapped. Wrong. There, tucked against the spine of my notebook, lay the bundle I'd seen him hide, dark tissue paper folded tight, its edges creased as though handled too many times. My hands shook as I lifted it out, the paper crinkling, loud as gunfire in the hushed room. I unwrapped it slowly, dread rising like bile. The object inside caught the light, a diamond ring. Not just any ring, massive, ostentatious, its center stone, the size of a marble haloed by smaller diamonds that shimmered in rainbow prisms against the lamplight. Platinum setting, heavy, real. My breath hitched. My hand trembled. This was no trinket, no cheap piece of costume jewelry. The weight alone told me it was genuine, worth thousands upon thousands. 15 grand, 20, maybe more. More than Terry had ever had, more than he could possibly earn at any new job he claimed to have landed. I sank into the nearest chair, my legs unwilling to carry me. The ring lay in my palm like molten iron, burning my skin with unspoken truths I didn't want to face. Where had he gotten it? Why hide it in my bag? The questions coiled in my chest like snakes, hissing doubts into every corner of my mind. Upstairs, the water still ran. Terry's humming drifted down faintly, a thin, nervous tune I didn't recognize. It seemed almost mocking a soundtrack to my unraveling. I stared at the ring, its beauty dazzling, its meaning terrifying. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about something far darker, something that threatened to swallow us all. Normal sounds from my son's footsteps, cheerful words, the easy banter of someone at peace with himself. But Terry was anything but normal, not tonight. The ring's brilliance mocked me from inside my pocket, each flash of reflected light a cruel reminder of how blind I'd been. I thought back to yesterday's argument, his desperate plea for money, the tears that had felt raw and convincing. But now they looked rehearsed. Had they planned this all along, he and Zella, using my fatherly instinct, my generosity, as nothing more than camouflage for something darker? My engineer's mind couldn't help it. It calculated scenarios the way it always did when confronted with a problem. The variables this time were trust, betrayal, and criminal intent. None of the outcomes were good. If Terry had stolen this ring, hiding it in my backpack, made me not just a bystander, but an unwitting accomplice. If he was planning something even worse, pinning it on me, I'd be a scapegoat in a crime I didn't commit. Upstairs, the water shut off. Pipes groaned and then fell silent. Footsteps crossed the bathroom floor, measured ordinary sounds, but they felt like a countdown to confrontation. Terry would be downstairs in seconds, expecting me outside, with the grill apron on, a proud father celebrating his son's success. Pure instinct drove me. I slipped the ring into my pocket and repacked the bag quickly, carefully. The tissue paper went back in place exactly where I'd seen him leave it. My hands shook as I zipped the bag closed, trying to erase my intrusion before he appeared. Just as I stood, his footsteps reached the top of the stairs. The ring in my pocket suddenly weighed as much as stone, heavy with betrayal. "Dad, everything okay in there?" His voice carried its usual warmth, but now I heard the hollowness beneath. Just heading back out, I called, forcing steadiness into my tone as I moved toward the kitchen. My body carried me forward on autopilot, while my mind reeled with questions I couldn't yet process. The ring burned against my leg with each step, not just jewelry evidence, a secret too dangerous to ignore. Through the kitchen window, Terry's voice floated back to me, casual as ever. "Dad, how do you want these steaks?" "Medium rare." "Whatever you think is best," I answered, my words level, though my chest was a battlefield. The ring felt like a live coal in my pocket, scalding my skin, dragging at me as if trying to pull me down into a pit I didn't yet see the bottom of. I turned toward the stairs, my feet moving automatically, avoiding the third step that had creaked for 2 decades. Each motion was deliberate, every breath controlled. If Terry could violate my space, then I had every right to reclaim the truth. I wasn't going to face this blindfolded. The hallway stretched out like a tunnel of memories. Family photos lined the walls, birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings. Smiling faces, moments that now seem staged like exhibits in a museum of a life I had misunderstood. My throat tightened as I passed them, my reflection in the glass frames, pale and haunted. Terry's bedroom door stood slightly ajar. Afternoon light bled through the window overlooking the backyard. From that angle, I could see his silhouette moving at the grill, flipping meat, laughing, playing the role of devoted son and family man. Perfect theater. I pushed the door open slowly. The hinges, long tended with oil, betrayed no sound. Inside, the room smelled faintly of Zella's perfume, layered now with smoke drifting in from outside. Her clothes were draped lazily over a chair. Terry's laptop sat closed on the desk, papers scattered nearby. Carelessness or a confidence that nobody would dare disturb them. The dresser stood in the corner like a silent sentinel, drawers stacked neatly. Secrets love drawers, especially the middle one. The sock drawer, innocuous on the surface, but always the first choice for hiding what mattered. I moved toward it, my weathered hands unsteady but resolute. The drawer slid open, revealing the clutter of intimacy, socks, underwear, cotton folded and unfolded in careless stacks. I dug gently, creating a hollow in the soft fabric. The tissue paper crinkled as I unwrapped the ring once more. Its brilliance glared at me, an accusation, a temptation, a curse. My hand trembled as I nestled it deep beneath their belongings, hiding it exactly as someone might if they wanted it discovered later, not in my bag, but in Terry's space where it belonged. "Dad, these are looking perfect out here." Terry's voice carried through the window, bright and enthusiastic. Genuine or just another flawless performance? I closed the drawer slowly, every fold of fabric returned to place, every line of socks neat again. My heart pounded as I backed away from the dresser, my decision sealed. If Terry wanted to play games with trust, with family, with loyalty, then I would be ready for him. The room held no trace of me except the fading warmth of my touch, and the silent vow I'd just made. The rules of their game had changed. From the upstairs window, I could see Terry moving below his shoulders, relaxed, his gestures smooth, as he set plates on the patio table. The picture of filial charm. He had no idea that 30 feet above him, the neat scaffolding of his plan was beginning to collapse, one thread after another, unraveling in my mind. My pulse thundered, not just in my chest, but in my temples, in the very tips of my fingers. Whatever he had meant to do with that diamond ring, whatever trap he had set with my backpack as bait, I had just turned the board around. If he wanted to play games with evidence, he was about to learn that an engineer knows more than how to build. He knows how to dismantle, how to expose the hidden gears. I moved back through the hallway, careful, deliberate, every step placed with the same precision I'd used when measuring steel beams or calibrating a machine. The old stairs accepted my weight in silence. I knew which ones to avoid after 20 years of creaks. Down in the kitchen, I plucked the steak sauce from the pantry, a mundane excuse to explain my absence should Terry ask. Through the window, he caught sight of me. He lifted his hand in a cheerful wave smile, bright and warm, as though nothing at all was amiss, as though he were still just my boy, proud to be standing beside his father. That smile should have eased me, but instead it hollowed my chest. I stepped onto the patio bottle and hand the char of the coals rising into the cooling evening air. And then it came, a sound that cleaved the fragile quiet like gunfire. Slam, slam, slam. Car doors, not one, not two, several, all in rapid succession. My head snapped toward the front of the house. The spatula in my hand felt suddenly absurd, a weapon too weak for what my gut already told me. Who comes unannounced at dusk? Why multiple cars? My mind scrambled, searching for logical explanations and finding none that brought comfort. I turned to Terry. The boyish grin had evaporated. What replaced it was sharper, hungrier, something that looked too close to anticipation. My stomach dropped. This wasn't surprise. This was expectation. "Who's here?" I demanded, my voice rough with confusion. "Were you expecting someone? I have no idea." Terry replied, but the words rang hollow, stage lines delivered without conviction. His eyes gleamed. Maybe neighbors checking on the smoke. But the voices that floated from the front yard weren't neighbors. They were clipped professional, carrying the weight of authority. A knot twisted in my gut. My blood ran cold. Then they appeared, 3 officers in uniform filing through the side gate, led by a woman in her 40s whose stance spoke of command. Her gaze swept the patio with surgical precision. One hand hovered near her radio. "Police," she barked, her voice sharp enough to still the night. "Nobody move." I stumbled back a step, spatula slipping from my hand, clattering against the patio stones like the gavel of a judge pronouncing sentence. The kitchen door swung open. Sella stepped out, a bowl of salad in her hands. Her eyes widened as she registered the uniforms. The bowl fell shattering lettuce and tomatoes across the red brick like confetti at a funeral. Then Terry moved. Not toward me, not with confusion or alarm. He raised his hand, finger extended, his voice steady, eager, rehearsed. "Officer," he said. "That's him." I saw the ring in his backpack. The accusation hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. "What?" The word cracked from my throat, raw and broken. "What ring? What nonsense are you?" But he wasn't looking at me. He was already striding closer to the lead officer, his posture cooperative, almost relieved. The performance flawless, too flawless. He wore the confidence of someone who had already prepared this scene, who had written his lines long before I ever stepped onto this stage. The woman introduced herself as Officer Brooks, eyes flicking between us, reading the fractures in our family tableau with clinical sharpness. "We received a report about stolen jewelry," she said. Terry didn't hesitate, didn't even glance at me. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, voice crisp with certainty. "My name is Terry Harland," and in that moment I knew this was never an accident. "I found the evidence in my father's possession." That's what Terry told them. His voice was steady, rehearsed, dripping with conviction, as he claimed to have seen the diamond ring from the downtown jewelry store robbery in my backpack. The words hung in the air like a noose tightening around my neck. My own son's testimony, sharp, cold, cutting through the fragile thread of trust between us. Yesterday, while I was out chasing job interviews, the puzzle pieces had clicked together in his mind. Or at least that's what he wanted the officers to believe. Every so-called revelation he spun sounded plausible on the surface, each one fitting with mechanical precision. But to me, each word felt sickening, like cogs grinding in a machine designed not to build, but to destroy me. Officer Brooks spoke into her radio, her tone clipped efficient. Her partners fanned out across the patio, with practiced precision, their boots scraping against stone. Behind them, the barbecue still smoked, forgotten steaks, charring into blackened husks. The acrid stench of burning meat rose thick in the night air, filling my lungs until I nearly gagged. "Sir, we need you to step away from the grill," Officer Brooks said firmly, her voice carrying that impossible combination of calm professionalism and immovable authority. I raised my hand slightly, my movements deliberate, showing them I had nothing to hide. But inside, my mind was spinning. This was my backyard, my grill, my family, my life. And yet I stood there treated like an intruder, like a criminal, because my son had chosen to point the finger. Terry stayed close to the officers as they escorted me inside, his voice low but brimming with suspiciously detailed knowledge. He didn't just know what was in my backpack, he knew where, which pocket, which fold, which compartment I supposedly favored. His familiarity was unnatural, too intimate. No son should know his father's belongings like that, unless he'd placed something there himself. Behind us, Zella trailed silently, her face pale, streaked with careful tears that looked painted on, almost theatrical. The mascara smudges the trembling hands. It all seemed too convenient, too rehearsed. She positioned herself close to Terry, as though by instinct reinforcing his story with her very presence. When we reached the sliding glass door, I caught sight of Terry's reflection in the kitchen window. And in that brief, unguarded moment, the mask slipped. The concerned son vanished. What replaced it was something harder, colder eyes gleaming with calculation. My own son, my flesh and blood. He had summoned the police into my home, spun lies into steel shackles, and now I was walking, step by step, into a trap he'd been laying for years, maybe decades. 30 years in the making. Inside, Officer Brooks unzipped my backpack with mechanical patience, spreading its contents across the coffee table like exhibits in a trial. Work gloves, measuring tape, energy bars, a weathered notebook, a handful of small tools, the artifacts of a builder, an engineer, a man who had spent his life creating rather than stealing. Terry hovered beside her like a guide, confidence radiating off him in smug waves. "It should be in the front pocket," he instructed smoothly, his finger pointing with certainty, wrapped in tissue paper. I saw him putting it there this afternoon. His words were venom and silk, but the officer's hands came up empty. The main compartment held nothing but dust and scraps of work. The side pockets offered only pens, old receipts, and faded business cards. No glitter of diamonds, no stolen ring. For the first time that evening, I saw the cracks form. Terry's practiced calm faltered his jaw, tightening his smile, curdling into something strained. "It has to be there," he blurted, voice pitching higher, betraying a tremor of desperation. I saw him put it in the front pocket. Check again. And that was when the last piece clicked into place inside my mind. His inside knowledge too precise to be accidental. His nervous energy masked as excitement. The way he had shepherded the officers to my bag while carefully steering attention away from anything of his own. I drew in a breath, steadying myself against the hurricane of betrayal. When I spoke, my voice surprised even me, calm, measured, almost gentle. "Officer," I said, each syllable deliberate. "Maybe you should check my son's dresser drawer." The words landed like a hammer blow. Terry whipped toward me, panic flashing like lightning across his face. His composure, so carefully built, shattered in an instant. "What? No, why would you?" "That's ridiculous." His voice cracked, scrambling, frantic. "There's no reason to," but Officer Brooks didn't waste time arguing. Her eyes narrowed, sharp and assessing, and she gave a subtle nod. One of her partners was already moving toward the stairs, another close behind. Terry's hands twitched at his sides, his breathing quickened. And in that single heartbeat, the balance of power in the room shifted. For the first time that night, it wasn't me under the spotlight. It was him. Terry's protest grew more frantic with every step we took up the stairs, his voice cracking under the weight of panic he could no longer disguise. "This is harassment. You can't just barge into our private." "Mr. Harlan," Officer Brooks cut him off sharply, her tone leaving no space for argument. She pushed open his bedroom door with the unshakable calm of someone who had seen this exact performance 100 times before. "We have reasonable cause based on your father's statement and your own behavior." The room greeted us with an almost mocking familiarity. Everything sat exactly as I'd seen it half an hour earlier. The dresser, the unmade bed, the chaos of a young man's life carefully staged to appear ordinary. My chest tightened as Officer Martinez moved straight to the dresser, pulling open the middle drawer with swift, practiced hands. Socks and folded t-shirts were shifted aside, mundane fabric disguising something far more damning. Then his hand stilled. A crumpled wad of tissue paper lay waiting like a trap I had narrowly avoided. Martinez unfolded it, and the sparkle hit us all at once. Diamonds unforgiving in their brilliance, catching the bedroom light and throwing it back like a jury's unanimous verdict. Terry's face drained of color, every trace of confidence fleeing in an instant. The ring glinted between Martinez's gloved fingers, and I felt my knees weaken. It was the same ring I'd found shoved into my backpack earlier, the one meant to brand me as a thief now lying exposed in its true hiding place. Terry Harlan Brooks announced, her voice ironclad. "You're under arrest for filing a false police report in possession of stolen property." The Miranda rights washed over me in a surreal echo, the clicking of handcuffs sounding far louder than it should have in that small upstairs room. For 30 years I had raised this boy, fed him, believed in him. Now I stood frozen, watching shackles close around his wrists. Behind us, Zella broke. Her sobs tore through the hallway, raw and uncontrollable, nothing like the carefully practiced tears she'd worn earlier. The facade crumbled. This was no performance now. This was despair. "This is a mistake," Terry shouted, thrashing, as officers guided him down the stairs. His voice cracked between rage and desperation. "You don't understand. The ring was in his bag. I put it there myself." His confession spilled into the air, like thick smoke from the abandoned barbecue still smoldering outside. Even as steel cuffs bit into his wrists, he couldn't stop himself from unraveling, revealing just how deep his deception had gone. I didn't move. I couldn't. I stood in the middle of my living room, surrounded by overturned cushions, scattered papers, the stripped open contents of my backpack, a crime scene carved out of my home. 30 years of fatherhood reduced to evidence bags and sworn testimony. Through the front window, I saw the glow of red and blue lights wash across the street. Neighbors gathered in clusters, whispers carried by the summer night. Their silhouettes lingered on porches, watching, judging, recording. In their minds, a scandal that would cling to my name forever. Terry's voice carried out into the yard, frantic and wild. He was still shouting, still insisting it was all a mistake, still painting himself as the victim of some elaborate betrayal. But the truth had already been carved into the record diamonds, wrapped in tissue paper, tucked into a drawer, fingerprints etched in certainty. Evidence doesn't lie. People do. And my son had lied to me for years. The house felt heavier once the officers left, heavier and emptier at the same time, as though something essential had been stripped away, along with my son in handcuffs. Silence hung in the air, broken only by the faint tick of the kitchen clock. On the table, police documents spread in grim order, timelines, sheets, evidence, photographs, official notes. Each page another nail in the coffin of a trust I had foolishly thought unbreakable. I stared at them with the same meticulous eye I once brought to engineering projects, tracing every line, every timestamp, reconstructing the betrayal like a machine diagram. My coffee sat untouched in Martha's favorite mug. It had long since gone cold, but I couldn't bring myself to sip from it anyway. The cup felt sacred, tainted now by the lies that had poisoned this house. Every surface, every object around me carried a shadow of deception I had been too blind, too hopeful, too loving to see. And in that cold, suffocating kitchen, I realized the most painful truth of all: my son had mistaken my love for weakness. Terry's official statement, given calmly to police hours before the arrest, landed in my hands like a dagger wrapped in neat legal phrasing. On the surface, it read like the words of a worried son bravely exposing his father's criminal behavior. But the more I read, the colder I became. It wasn't my boy speaking from those pages. It was a stranger wearing my son's voice, my son's handwriting, my son's face. The deception was too deliberate, too rehearsed. This was no impulsive outburst of panic. This was a blueprint of betrayal, months of planning, every answer prepared, every detail sharpened into a weapon. I forced myself to keep reading, though each sentence tore something inside me. The evidence reports lay scattered across my kitchen table, a grim collage of paper and ink, spelling out a truth I had spent a lifetime believing could never exist. A glossy photograph stared up at me, proof from Diamond Haven jewelry store. The same ring, the very one I had pulled from my backpack in disbelief, photographed beneath perfect white lighting. Price tag $18,500. Then the financial trail appeared. Pages of paperwork listing Terry's mounting debts, $23,000, most of it lost recklessly at the Prairie Wind Casino. My son had gambled his future away, and when the walls closed in, tried to purchase his freedom with my downfall. The numbers lined up too perfectly, each one hammering another nail into the coffin of my trust. I whispered the realization aloud to the empty kitchen, my voice rough and foreign. The job interview. That was his alibi for the robbery. The words echoed back at me from the tiles, solidifying into something undeniable. Suddenly, every memory of that evening sharpened into cruel clarity. The supposed celebration dinner. The grilled steaks he insisted on making, his easy laughter, the way he poured my wine just a little too generously. It had all been theater. A performance designed to lull me into relaxation, to leave me unguarded while his trap snapped shut. If his plan had worked, I would be in a concrete cell right now, branded a thief, while Terry sat in this house, my house, enjoying the fruits of 30 years of my labor. He and Zella would have let me rot behind bars for their comfort. A sharp knock on the front door cut through my spiraling thoughts. For a moment I couldn't breathe, imagining it was another officer with some new charge or fresh piece of damning evidence. But when I peered through the window, I saw a familiar silhouette. Cecile. His posture alone betrayed his concern. Shoulders slightly bent, head tilted, as though bracing himself before stepping into a storm. He'd likely been watching the police cars, hearing the whispers ripple through our neighborhood. Now finally he'd come. Ray. His voice carried a careful gentleness, the kind used with wounded animals or grieving parents. I saw the news this morning. Thought you might need company. I opened the door to find him holding 2 steaming cups of coffee, his weathered face set with the same expression I'd once seen him wear at funerals during his years on the force, an expression that balanced compassion with grim familiarity. Cecile had stood with countless families in the aftermath of betrayal and loss. He knew this territory, and now unthinkably so did I. "Come in," I said hoarsely, stepping aside. trying to piece together how long this has been going on. Inside, Cecile's eyes swept over the evidence-strewn kitchen table. Reports, photographs, timelines all laid out like a crime scene diorama. His gaze was sharp-trained, still carrying the instinct of a detective. But beneath the practiced analysis, I saw the slump of his shoulders, the heaviness of a friend mourning what I had lost. "This looks like a sophisticated frame-up," he said at last, lowering himself into the chair opposite me. "Your boy knew exactly how to manipulate the evidence." I nodded, staring at the police photo of the ring, its diamonds cold and merciless. If I hadn't moved that ring, my voice cracked. I don't even know why I did it. Instinct, maybe. Something about that night, it all felt wrong. Cecile studied the timeline sheet, tracing Terry's movements with one calloused finger. His jaw tightened. "That instinct saved you from a felony conviction. Look here, the timing of the robbery, the planted evidence, even Zella's alibi testimony. They had every detail covered." The smell of bacon drifted faintly from a neighbor's open window, cruel in its normalcy. Somewhere nearby, life was continuing as though nothing had happened. Families cooking breakfast, children laughing, dogs barking at passing cars. It should have been a morning like any other. Instead, I sat buried under reports proving my own son had tried to strip me of everything. My freedom, my home, my dignity. He would have inherited it all if I'd gone to prison, I said quietly, the truth crystallizing fully for the first time. My voice shook, not from anger, but from grief. My house, my savings, every hour I ever worked, all of it. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, fighting the sting in my eyes. The reality pressed down like a weight I could never lift. My son hadn't just wanted money. He had wanted my life, the house, my retirement savings, even Martha's life insurance money. The words cut out of me like shards of glass. Seal nodded, his face grim, carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much human tragedy. "And with you branded as a criminal," he said quietly, "who would ever doubt his story? It would have been the perfect crime if you hadn't been sharper than he gave you credit for." I gathered the scattered papers from the kitchen table, my hands trembling at first, then steadying as my engineer's instinct took over. Evidence, timeline, financial motive, consequences. Each neat stack became a cold reminder, a different facet of my own son's willingness to sacrifice his father for profit and survival. "I need a lawyer," I finally said, the words rasping in my throat. "About the house, about Zella living here, about protecting whatever is left." Seal rose, his tall frame casting a shadow across the faded kitchen tiles. He knew without me saying that this moment marked the closing of one chapter and the reluctant opening of another. "Let's get you to a lawyer, Ray," he said gently but firmly. "It's time you started thinking about your future instead of drowning in their betrayal." I looked around the kitchen, once the heart of our family life. Now it was only a crime scene of memories. The table where Terry had slammed his fist in anger, the window where I had caught sight of his deception, the chairs where lies were served alongside dinner. Every corner whispered of betrayal. Rising from my seat felt like lifting a boulder, yet also like shedding a burden I no longer had to carry. 3 weeks later, the courthouse steps rose solid and unyielding beneath my shoes. Seal walked beside me, his stride steady, anchoring me as we climbed. 8:30 sharp. 3 weeks of preparation with prosecutors had brought me to this moment, the moment I would watch my son answer for trying to destroy me. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with quiet efficiency. Polished wood paneling, solemn air, and the faint echo of footsteps set the stage for the drama about to unfold. My fingers fumbled with my tie, the same black tie I had worn 5 years ago to Martha's funeral. Even the fabric seemed to choke me with the weight of memory. At the defendant's table sat Terry, Orange County jail clothing, wrists shackled, his face drawn and hollow from weeks behind bars. The bravado he'd once carried, the same arrogance he'd worn that night by the grill, was gone. When our eyes met, only desperation stared back. In the rows behind him sat Zella, pale and fragile, swallowed in what looked like borrowed formal clothes, her hands twisted in her lap, betraying nerves that words could not hide. "Mr. Harlan," the prosecutor began, once I had sworn in, his voice steady and clear, "please describe what you observed on April 17th. I drew a slow, steady breath. "I saw my son place a stolen ring into my backpack," I said. "He intended to frame me for robbery. The words came out clipped precise. Not an accusation, but a report. An engineer delivering observations measured undeniable. The defense attorney rose at once, searching for cracks. Isn't it possible, Mr. Harlan, that you misunderstood your son's intentions, that this was not malice, but no? I interrupted, voice flat but resolute. The evidence speaks for itself. The lights dimmed slightly as the screen flickered on. High-definition security footage from Diamond Haven filled the courtroom. There, unmistakable, was Terry caught in the act of the robbery. The timestamp matched perfectly with the job interview he had sworn to attend. I watched his face as he saw himself on screen, the moment his lies unraveled, the instant he realized the truth had been carved into record. When Judge Reed called for sentencing, Terry snapped. His voice cracked as he shouted across the room, "Dad, you don't understand." I was desperate. The gambling debts I defended, Terry Harlan. Judge Reed's stern voice thundered, cutting through his plea, "You will remain silent." And in that silence, I felt the finality settle over me like winter frost. No more excuses. No more lies. The courtroom walls closed in with the truth, the sentence, and the cold, unfillable space where the bond between father and son had once lived. You are hereby sentenced to 5 years in state prison for armed robbery and attempted witness tampering. The judge's words struck like hammer blows. Then came the gavel, sharp, unyielding, final. Its echo rolled through the courtroom, not just as wood on wood, but as the sound of a door slamming shut on 30 years of fatherhood. Two bailiffs stepped forward, their hands practiced and impersonal as they secured Terry in chains. The rattling of shackles filled the silence like cruel punctuation. My son lifted his eyes toward me, desperate, searching for even the smallest spark of forgiveness. I held his gaze only long enough to make it clear there would be no rescue this time. My stare was steady, my refusal absolute. He had chosen his path, and I would no longer follow him into darkness. Zella's sentence came next: 2 years probation, community service, and in order to secure her own housing within 30 days. The judge spoke of rehabilitation, the chance to rebuild, the possibility of redemption. His words, clinical and balanced, felt almost irrelevant against the irrevocable truth of watching my son vanish through the courthouse doors, swallowed by the machinery of justice. When the session adjourned, the courtroom dissolved into motion, reporters pressing forward, microphones, angled questions hurled like stones. How does it feel to be betrayed by your own blood? Do you still consider him your son? What is justice to a father? I walked past them without a word, their voices chasing me into the hallway, like vultures circling a carcass. Seal kept pace at my side, silent, his presence a shield against the onslaught. He knew some moments could not be mended with words. The courthouse elevator groaned as it carried us down to the street level, a mechanical descent into a world that hadn't stopped turning, despite the collapse of mine. Outside, life pulsed on traffic, humming, strangers chatting, the sky stretched in its indifferent blue. "How do you feel?" Seal asked quietly as we reached his car. "Like I just buried my son," I answered, my voice stripped of ornament, raw as an open wound. Only this time it was his choice to die. The drive back through suburban Omaha passed in contemplative silence. Familiar streets, tidy lawns, and cul-de-sacs blurred past the window, yet all looked altered, as though betrayal had stained even the sidewalks and hedges. I knew I would be leaving it all soon. Some chapters of life end in triumph, others in relief. This one ended with nothing more than the cold acceptance that even family, the very people you sacrifice for, can shatter the deepest trust. Survival now meant something different. It meant choosing my own well-being over a lifelong obligation to those who had forsaken me. It meant walking away not as a coward, but as a man determined to live. Back at the house, moving boxes lined the hallway like silent sentinels guarding the path to my escape. 30 years of accumulation stripped down to bare essentials: a toolbox, a few changes of clothes, legal documents that had saved my name, and photographs of Martha, my anchor. My proof that love had once existed here. Everything else, the furniture, the appliances, the ghosts tethered to these walls, would remain behind. Zella emerged from the spare room, her frame fragile, her suitcase small, her face carved with desperation. The court order demanded her departure today, just as it did mine. But while my future pointed toward freedom, hers was nothing but fog. "Ray, please," she said, stepping in front of the doorway, blocking the threshold as though her body could keep me anchored. Her voice quivered. "Please reconsider. I have nowhere to go." Terry made me do it. You know I didn't want any of this. Her eyes glistened wide and pleading, clinging to me as though I were the last lifeline in a storm. I was scared to refuse him. Zella whispered, her voice cracking, as though confession might earn her absolution. I paused mid-motion, a cardboard box balanced in my hands, and studied the woman who had stood beside my son while plotting my destruction. Her wedding ring glinted in the morning light that streamed through the kitchen window, the same ring I had seen her twist nervously while lying about Terry's so-called job prospects. That tiny band of gold was both a symbol of her devotion to him and a reminder of the role she had chosen to play in my downfall. You should have considered the consequences before betraying me, I replied, setting the box down with deliberate care. My voice was steady, too calm for the storm churning inside me. You had choices, Zella. We all do. And you chose poorly. Tears welled in her eyes, though, whether from regret or self-preservation, I couldn't tell. But where will I go? I don't have money or family. I don't have anyone. You'll figure it out, I said, my tone unflinching. People who survive betrayal usually do. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the sound of tape stretching across cardboard as I sealed another box. At precisely 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Carissa's Henderson, the realtor who had shepherded me through this painful process, stepped inside with her folder of final paperwork. She carried herself with professional patience, aware that she was not merely selling a house, but presiding over the burial of decades of memories. We sat at the kitchen table, the very one where so many family meals had turned into battlegrounds, where raised voices and slammed fists had once defined my evenings. Now the same table bore witness to something quieter, but far more permanent, the transfer of ownership. Ray Harlan's name faded from the deed, replaced by that of a young couple eager to build a life here, unaware of the scars embedded in these walls. As I signed the last page, Mrs. Henderson slid a small envelope across the table. Keys to your Denver apartment, she said gently. 1 bedroom, mountain view. Exactly what you asked for. I held the envelope in my palm, its weight far heavier than metal should allow. Inside, it was not just a set of keys, it was escape renewal and a chance to define myself without the shadow of betrayal. Seal appeared in the doorway, sleeves rolled dust on his hands from loading the moving truck. He leaned against the frame for a moment, taking me in with quiet eyes. When we shook hands, his grip lingered longer than usual, filled with unspoken recognition that this moment marked the closing of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. Promise you'll visit within 6 months, I said, meaning every word. Promise you'll answer when I call, he replied, knowing that healing required distance, but not isolation. Outside, the moving truck rumbled to life, pulling away, first hauling furniture boxes and the remnants of my old life toward a future I had designed without the interference of family who had proven unworthy of trust. I walked slowly through the empty rooms, each one echoing with ghosts. I removed Terry's photographs from the walls but left the nail holes behind. Little scars in the plaster, evidence that someone had once belonged here, even if the belonging had ended in betrayal. Finally, in the garage, my pickup truck waited, engine idling bed, packed tight with everything essential. Tools, clothes, Martha's photographs, documents that cleared my name, the distilled essence of a lifetime stripped down to what mattered most. I stood there for one last breath, letting the air of this house fill me for the final time. It smelled of dust, wood polish, and faintly of Martha's perfume, a ghost of her lingering even now. Then I turned the key, the engine roared, and I drove toward the open road. Toward Denver, toward mountains, toward a life no longer tethered to the wreckage of family betrayal. New Colorado license plates, a new address, a new phone number. Each detail felt small on its own, but together they built the scaffolding of a reinvention I once thought impossible. With every form signed, every number changed, every tie severed, I was closing the book on one life and preparing cautiously, hopefully, to write another. Zella stood on the sidewalk as I backed the truck down the driveway. Her suitcase sat at her feet, a mute reminder of choices made and debts unpaid. Behind her, the house loomed with its peeling paint and hollow rooms now stripped of meaning. For a moment, my gaze lingered on the stretch of concrete where I'd once run, behind Terry's bicycle, steadying the handlebars as he wobbled toward independence 20 years ago. His laughter had filled the air that day, bright and hopeful. Those were good memories. They would always belong to me. But good memories don't erase betrayal. They don't undo choices, and they certainly don't bind me to an obligation that had already bled me dry. I shifted into drive, glanced at Zella one last time, and chose happiness over guilt. The tires crunched on gravel as I turned toward the road. Interstate signs pointed me west toward Denver and toward possibilities I had only dared to imagine. The radio crackled as I twisted the dial, landing on a country music station. Fiddles, steel strings, and voices rough with heartbreak poured through the speakers. I rolled the windows down, letting the wind rush through the cab. For the first time since Martha's death, I felt something stir inside me that resembled freedom. The miles disappeared beneath my tires in a steady rhythm, an erasure of the years behind me, a drumbeat of the life ahead. Omaha shrank in the rear-view mirror, reduced to skyline, then horizon, then nothing at all. And then there they were, Colorado's mountains. They rose on the horizon like ancient guardians, jagged silhouettes against a deepening sky. They weren't just mountains. They were promises. Promises of elevation, of fresh perspective, of a man allowed to climb again after being dragged down so long. At 58 years old, I was starting over, entirely. No family ties to weigh me down. No financial obligations to anyone but myself. No guilt about choosing my own well-being over the demands of people who'd proven unworthy of trust. The truck's engine hummed a steady hymn to survival as it carried me westward. I realized then that sometimes the greatest act of love isn't clinging, forgiving, or rescuing. Sometimes it's refusing to enable, refusing to surrender yourself to those who would tear you apart. Behind me lay 30 years of loyalty, heavy with sacrifice and betrayal. Ahead of me stretched the road, and with it the blank page of whatever time I had left. For the first time in years, that blank page didn't terrify me. It thrilled me, because I alone would decide what words filled it. And maybe that was enough.